In this lesson, we're going to see how to use the HTML5 selector API to locate content quickly and easily in an HTML document. So first of all, I thought I'd show you a quick recap on how it works already in HTML4. First of all, there's a function called getElementById, where you can specify the ID of an element you're interested in, and it gives you back that element. So this would give me back the first div at the top of the document. There's also an existing function in HTML4 called getElementsByTagName, where you specify a tag name, such as input, that's the name of the element that you're interested in, and that'll give you back all the elements that are of that name. So this will give me back the first 3 input controls in the document. So these are existing APIs in HTML4, but they don't give you the full flexibility you might want. So for example, you can't find all the input controls which are enabled, or all the input controls that have a certain characteristic. You'd end up having to write some loop-in code down here on line 11 to go further. Now in HTML5, we have a much more powerful syntax. We have 2 new functions called querySelector and querySelectorAll. The querySelector function allows you to specify a CSS type syntax, and it gives you back the first matching element. So have a look here. I've got an input.required selector string. This would give me back the first element of type input that has the required class. It would give me back the first input control up here. The second function, querySelectorAll, gives you back all the matches, as you might imagine. So this would give me back all of the input controls that have the required class in this example. So it would give me back both of these 2 input controls because they both have the required class. It wouldn't give me back the third input control, obviously, because that doesn't have the required class. Now, you can use quite sophisticated CSS syntax. Have a look at this third example. This third example searches for, using CSS type syntax, first of all, it'll find all elements that have that ID. Obviously, there should just be one element with that ID. And then it'll find all TD descendants of that element. So if I had a div named products, any TD cell in that div would be selected. And you can specify multiple search strings if you want to, using the comma separator. So this example here would select all elements that have either a warning class or an error class as their CSS class. So it would give me back the span here because it has a warning class, plus the div here because it has an error class. So that's the basic syntax. QuerySelector allows you to select the first element that matches. QuerySelectorAll gives you back all of them. Let's have a look at a real example. QuerySelector demo. I'll show you the code and then I'll run it. All of these examples are in the project files folder, so feel free to have a try yourself if you want to. In this example, I have a table. Let me just scroll down a little bit so you can see. I have a table with 9 images. Okay, so each cell, I have the first cell here. This cell contains an image for the Welsh flag, and the next cell contains an image for the Norwegian flag, and so on. So we have 9 images in the table, and there's a button. When I click that button, I have some JavaScript code that executes. So let me show you the code down here from lines 50 down to line 59. This installs an event handler for the button click. So using the querySelector function to find the element who has the ID of echo button, that will find the button, and when the button is clicked, it runs this event handler function. Okay, so let's take a look at the contents of this function. Now, this is the key to the example. This statement here will select the first TD cell that has the hover pseudo class. In other words, it'll tell me which table cell is currently hovered over, and it'll give it back to me. Now, it could be that the mouse isn't actually hovering over a TD cell. It might be hovering elsewhere in the document. So this statement here could give me back null. So I check against that. I check to see if there was a table cell that was hovered over. And then what I do here is I take the inner HTML of that table cell. So let's imagine the user is currently hovering over the USA flag. Then this statement here, inner HTML, would give me back the inner HTML of that table cell. It would give me back that HTML there. And then I take that HTML and I copy it into another area. So this statement here, this will take the HTML and copy it into an echo div. So it finds an element called echo div, and it assigns the HTML to be a copy of the hovered table cell. So in other words, the echo div will receive a copy of the image that we're currently hovering over. Let's have a look at how that example works when we run it. I've opened this file already in Google. It would work equally well in pretty much any browser these days. So these are the 9 flags: Wales, Norway, Sweden, Brazil, China, India, Spain, Greece, and US. Now, the way the example works is, first of all, let me make sure that the button has the input focus on the keyboard. I'll hover over the Welsh flag. I come from Wales, so I'll do that. And when I press enter, it'll click the button, realize that the Welsh flag is hovered over, grab the HTML for that Welsh flag, copy it into the div. Marvelous. And just for good measure, let me take the USA flag, press enter, they click the button, and it grabs the USA flag. Okay, so that's an example of how you can select one element using Query Selector. The last example we're going to have a look at is how you can select multiple elements. So let me go back into the editor and show you this example. Fairly similar to before, I've adjusted it slightly. I still have a table that has 9 flags, but this time each cell in my table contains a checkbox, and the checkbox has a name: Wales, Norway, Sweden, and that's relevant for the example. Each cell also displays an image, so the user can actually see something. Okay, so in each cell we have a checkbox and an image, and then down below, let me show you the code. Well, first of all, there's a button, and I find that button using, well, this time I'm using getElementById. You can still use the traditional DOM functions if you want to. Obviously there, I could have said Query Selector if I'd wanted to instead. Now have a look at on line 53. This example shows how you can use Query Selector All. It searches for all elements, star means all elements, that have the checked pseudo class. In other words, it'll find automatically all the checkboxes which are checked, and it gives me back a collection of them. I then iterate through that collection, through that array, and for each checkbox that's checked, I add a string representing a list item. So this is going to build up a bulleted list containing the names of all the checkboxes that I've checked. And then it'll take that list and display it in the echo div. So let me run the example to show you how that works. So I'll select some flags: Wales, Norway, USA, and Spain. Click the button. The button will find all the checkboxes which are checked using Query Selector All, and then get the names of all the checkboxes and displays a bulleted list like so. So that's the end of the lesson. We've seen how you can use Query Selector to find one element, and Query Selector All to find all elements that match a specified selector string. And the selector string can take advantage of powerful CSS features, searching for pseudo classes, attributes, and so on.